Ed Opperman, a private investigator, data recovery and computer forensics specialist, radio host, and investigative journalist. Growing up in the South Bronx, Ed was a prominent figure in the counterculture movement in New York City in the late 1970s and early 80s, and has lived a very colorful life filled with interesting characters and situations which ultimately led him to a complete change in his life and outlook. Currently residing in Las Vegas, Ed is one of the premier experts on a plethora of issues, ranging from serial killers to the connection between government agencies and the counterculture movement, and everything in between. He's also one hell of a nice guy. How are you today, Ed?
Hey, TJ, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I really appreciate you doing this. I want to get into the Son of Sam case and the Process Church of the Final Judgment. But first, would you mind telling me about how you became involved with the counterculture, namely the yuppies, and where you were at in life during the late 1970s?
Yeah, that was the yippies. The yippies.
The yippies. Yeah. I'm sorry, yuppies.
No, the phrase yuppies came from yippies, because yippies were the Youth International Party, and they came out of the '68 convention and the Chicago 8 trial. Guys like Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, all these anti-war activists in the '60s. So then, when that kind of dwindled out, the yippies went through a succession of different leadership. Tom Forsyth and who died, and he was part of High Times magazine, and then Dana Beal took over when I got hooked up. And basically, what happened with me was I was a pothead on Staten Island, as a kid in high school, and I heard about this National Marijuana Day march they have in New York City, and we went down there one day to get posters, and I just sat down and I started hearing all this stuff. I was like 16 years old, like 1977. And I started hearing all this stuff about the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations and all these the things about the military-industrial complex and how much power they had and things about the Kennedy assassination. The guy that wrote the book Coup d'Etat in America, A.J. Weberman, was right there in front of me.
No kidding.
Yeah, man.
Wow.
And as a kid, this was like the coolest thing in the world. And I found out, Move, that group Move, I have them on the show all the time, that they got bombed in Philadelphia.
Yes, sir.
Before they got bombed, they were in the Yippie newspaper, The Overthrow, because of a shootout that happened at their first house.
Wow.
Yeah, so I fell into this group.
Kidding.
It was amazing, man. It really was amazing. I fell into this group, and everything they told me there was no internet back in those days, But all the stories they were telling me and the information they were giving me just had the ring of truth, and it all made such sense, And then I started reading the Overthrow magazine, and then I got involved in the WBAI radio station in New York, and started hearing the truth for the first time in my life, and it totally changed my life, a different path of direction.
Truth is terrifying, though, isn't it?
You know what? Yeah, it is in a lot of ways. But when my kid was young, my kid is 15 now. She's a total revolutionary and an activist. Tonight we're going to the Black Lives Matter protest on the Strip, and tomorrow we're doing a sit-in at the FBI headquarters, and then we're going to another BLM protest. And when she was growing up, I was afraid to tell her this kind of stuff, because then you think, well, they'll be discouraged. They won't have motivation in life. They'll think, well, it's hopeless. It's a rigged system and it's hopeless. We can't fight back. And I was worried about that. But instead, she's turned into a fighter, and a resistance fighter. And I think that's important. We need to know the truth and spread the truth.
That's fantastic. So would you mind painting a picture for me of New York in around 1977, about the time the Son of Sam killings were in full effect?
You know what? It was a total different time and place. How old are you?
I am 41.
Okay, then you would have a little bit of an idea. But the 70s was a time of freedom of expression. The movies were different back then. It was like a liberation going on, the women's liberation, all this kind of stuff, homosexual liberation movements and marches and stuff. And it was a time of freedom and expression. Great time to live in a lot of ways. Although at the time we thought it was a letdown from the 60s. We thought it was because disco was coming up and stuff.
Sure.
But growing up, with the Son of Sam murders going on in New York City, was a pretty terrifying time, because it was on the front page almost every single day. And everyone was worried about, and I lived in the Bronx at that time, and everyone was worried about what was going on with this and who was involved, how many people were involved, and women were cutting their hair short because there was this theory that he was only going after women with long brown hair.
Right.
It was just a very bizarre time. And the idea of a cult wasn't in the mainstream newspapers at all.
No, and I find that really interesting as well, because when you start looking into the case, there was a very active cult that involved the Carr brothers. And, I mean, for sure, there was absolutely no doubt that things were going on there at the park. And it wasn't just there. You had the murder that happened in California. Oh, what was her name?
Arliss Perry.
Yes. Which David Berkowitz had information on that he only could have known if there was an active cult. That proves that there was something that was stretching coast to coast at that time.
Well, not only that, but if you just look at the letters he was sending to Jimmy Breslin,
sure,
there was all kinds of occult references in there, and looking back at it with hindsight, yeah, we can see it all. But at the time, it was just, oh, he's a madman, he's a crazy man. He hates women, and because look, he wrote women, he spelled it like demon, But
right, women.
Yeah, right. It was so bizarre. They just tried to whitewash over everything. By the way, the Arliss Perry case, I guess you didn't catch it. I just interviewed a new witness in that case came out.
I was going to actually bring that up.
Okay, I'll wait then.
But, yeah, please tell.
Okay. Well, this guy came out of the woodwork, this guy named McCracken, this witness. And he did an interview. He came out and he contacted the investigators in the Arliss Perry murder in Stanford, California. I think it was 1974. A really bizarre case where this woman was killed in a church over there on Stanford University campus, nearby. And then her body was positioned in all kinds of occultic symbolism with candles and all kind of weird stuff. And it's always been alleged, it was been alleged by Berkowitz that a man named Tom Menser, who was a convicted hitman, was involved in that murder because he was a hitman for the Process Church cult out of New York City. It was stretching nationwide. And,
right.
We're in touch with Menser. He denies it. He says he had nothing to do with that, and it's the same story over and over again. He would never be involved with those kind of hippies. They called him the Manson, too, because he was such a prolific hitman,
Right.
A prolific murderer. And he is involved in other murders. He admits it, My investigation of Menser, which I think is cutting edge, I can't complain about what I've been doing with that. We've matched him up to some pretty intense stuff. He was bodyguard for Mama Cass at one point. We found out, which is interesting because Papa Phillips, Papa John Phillips, who came out in the INS police report that he was funding the Process Church out there in California, and he had all kinds of connections too to the Manson killings. So anyway, and this guy Menser too. He's been convicted of other murders. He was involved in the murder of Roy Radin, who was obviously a member of the Process Church, a part of the cult in New York City. Pretty much, he's the one that got me interested in him, the murder of Roy Radin, in this whole thing. So anyway, we got this new witness, McCracken. And he describes he was walking by the church that day and he heard a flute playing inside, so he peeked into the church to see what was going on. And he saw some guy in an afro wig playing the flute. And, he didn't think anything. And there was a woman on the altar, naked woman on the altar, lying there with candles around her. But he didn't think anything of it. He thought they were just doing some kind of occult ceremony. They were fans of Aleister Crowley or something. And he just went about his way. He felt he was unwelcome there. He didn't think anybody was in danger, but he went about his way. And it wasn't until years later that he found out about the murder that went on in that church, and he contacted the cold case sheriff's department in that case, and was in touch with the private investigator who was originally the detective in charge of that investigation. And they actually went and they were able to track down the man who they think was there playing the flute, who is now a famous composer. They describe him. Now, we've been able to figure out who that composer is. There's a list of clues in my interview with McCracken, and a little team of chat room warriors and stuff like that, and investigators came into the same conclusion of who it is. And he does have a very dark history and a very dark past and very bizarre musicals and operas and stuff that he produces, well, involving the occult and murder of women and death and autopsies, all kind of weird stuff. So it's a new break in the case. I'll be interviewing soon the detective who's a private investigator now, who was originally in charge of that investigation.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot going on, man. A lot going on, you know?
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I hope you break this thing open. I hope Berkowitz talks. He's getting up there where he's not going to be around a whole lot longer, and he's got to talk.
Well, you know, it's interesting because a lot of stuff too, like the guys in charge of the Orlis Perry murder investigation have talked to Berkowitz, and they don't find him credible in regards to this, his information in this case. But who knows, you know? And the people around Menser don't believe it either. But who knows? And now we have this new witness, and who knows about him? You know, he does sound truthful to me. He's got his story down pat, that's for sure. But I cannot believe that the murder could have been done by one person. I think other people had to have shown up later on, you know, and he believes it's just this one person. It's a single killer. So, but who knows? You know, you just got to let's document everything. Let's talk to everybody, get them down on record, and what we can talk about, and what we can't, we'll save for the future for someone else to take up when it's safe to talk.
Right. And that's the thing about it. It's so unbelievable because when the connections start coming down, you mentioned Mama Cass, and that brings up the entire Laurel Canyon issue of where a lot of this counterculture movement came out of, just happened to come out of this place called Laurel Canyon. And it connects with the Manson family. It connects with Hollywood, secret government movie stages. I mean, it's just wild, man, how all these connections start happening. And it almost makes it too crazy to believe, frankly.
Yeah, that happens too, you know. But when you look at it, the stuff that's out there that's known, like Terry Melcher and the Beach Boys and their connection to Manson. Manson was living at their house.
Right,
you know? And then you got stuff that even gets more elaborate because this character who took the photo right before John Lennon was assassinated, this guy Paul Goresh, you know, and then he says, you know, he was a security guard that night, but then he talks about later on, and he says, but I became a photographer because people like the Beach Boys wanted me to come out and photograph them. So, you know, and there's a lot of these guys, they're into stuff too, like purchasing the house that Crowley lived in, and, you know, or purchasing the house that the Manson murders took place in, or using it as a recording studio. So a lot of these musicians and stuff like that too, they're very weaved into all this as well. You have, back to the Process Church, you have John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Everyone knows the story about how they met at this art gallery, this art exhibit that she had in the UK, and that art gallery was owned by the Process Church. The Indica Art Gallery was run by the Process Church.
That's just crazy.
Yeah.
That's absolutely crazy. And now Manson, I mean, this brings up a whole nother can of worms when you get into Metzer, and, you know, what was he really doing? Was Manson a hitman essentially for the Process Church? Was he part of this? Because he mentions, especially in his 88 interview with Geraldo Rivero, he talks about a black book and a list and phone numbers coming out of New York. I don't know if you've heard that interview. He actually says, and when these people broke their words, I'm talking about Melcher. When he broke his word, he didn't do what he said. He was going to, oh, geez, I'm so sorry. Lino LaBlacchia got all stabbed up, and all that gold, that stuff was laying all around, and that little black phone book from New York with lists was gone. And then he mentions it again later on in the interview. It's really strange.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that. That is interesting. You know, the whole story about Terry Melcher and his whole life is bizarre to begin with. You know, his mother was Doris Day.
Yes.
And you know, when she gave birth to this kid, she dropped him off at her parents' house and then went on tour, went on the road, and didn't pick him up till another 10 years later, until after she left her husband, who was supposedly the father of this kid, and then married the guy who I think is actually his father. So that whole thing is just all bizarre to begin with. And even too, there's a recording of John Lennon when he and May Pang went to California. He talks about, falling out of a car at 3 a.m. in the morning drunk and winding up at Doris Day's house.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of weird stuff. Now, interesting too, you mentioned about this book with the phone numbers and stuff because, Roman Polanski broke into John Phillips' house to try and steal his phone book to get a copy of his handwriting to see if it would match the writing on the wall in blood at the crime scene over there at the Manson when Sharon Tate was killed. So that I never heard that before. And there is a theory too that because I think it's pretty well known that Sebring was involved in dealing coke. So when you talk about Manson saying that there was gold everywhere, that could have been that there was coke and drugs everywhere that he was referring to. Yeah, but there's an INS document. I have a copy of it. I got it from Maury Terry, author of The Ultimate Evil, that says that Manson was working for the Process Church, that Papa Phillips was funding the Process Church activity in California, that the Manson family, when they were in jail, were sewing Process Church emblems into their blankets, that Sirhan Sirhan, the assassin of Robert F. Kennedy, attended Process Church orgies at Sharon Tate's house.
I heard that as well.
Yeah. So a lot of bizarre stuff out there.
Yeah, and the whole Laurel Canyon thing. If there was some attempt to essentially hijack the counterculture movement and to tar the hippie movement with a broad brush as being something evil that they were working towards, it would have made sense that they wanted to keep these record companies and these bands in line with what their agenda was. And Manson comes on the scene, and all of a sudden, I mean, that whole thing is just so odd. You had the MK Ultra experiments going on at the same prisons he was part of, and he actually ends up in a cell next to Timothy Leary. What are the odds of all that?
When you look at his background. But, Manson was also at Boys Town.
Right.
All that stuff was going on there with the Franklin cover-up. So, and also, too, there's all kinds of stuff, too. There's a really good documentary by Scott Michaels called 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter. You can find it online free, or others you can buy it for a couple of bucks on Amazon. And he's very thorough in his investigation of Manson. And he talks about how, first of all, Manson was involved in an escort service. People have this view of the Manson family as living out in the desert all the time and, flat broke and doing all this kind of stuff. But Manson worked at an escort service that had an office, had a phone number, had desks and stuff like that,
Right.
And he shot the guy who was running it, too. And he got away with that, too. He never got charged for that. There was that whole thing. Then suddenly they had all this money for these dune buggies, and they had field radios. They had military equipment, field radio equipment and stuff at the Spawn Ranch or one of these, or out in one of these locations that they, one of these hideouts that they had, And also, too, it's interesting, too, because at that same time with this dune buggy business, Colonel Michael Aquino, also had a dune buggy that he would drive around with 2 machine gun turrets on it.
Really?
Yeah, that he would drive around the base with. So, coincidence? Who knows?
Oh, man, I hate to even get off topic here, but you mentioned Michael Aquino, and he is a very interesting guy. He was in charge of the psychological warfare operations during Vietnam. And, I mean, I've heard rumors of some pretty crazy stuff that was going on there with the Phoenix program and whatnot. And he was connected with the Church of Satan. At the same time, he was involved in psychological warfare operations. And you know about Ted Gunderson, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, sure.
What do you think about Ted?
Okay, well, I've talked about this in the past. I knew Ted Gunderson just through PI stuff. And I liked him, Then when I started getting into the internet and watching all that stuff, I thought he was cool. Then one day, I called up, I was talking to the mother of the McMartin preschool kids. And she was dating Gunderson, And
no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he was living at her house. And she paid for those tunnel reports, and then he was selling them. She was upset about that. And we were talking about this and that, because I was kind of considered like an expert on McMartin at the time. I was posting online about it a lot. And so she thought I was somebody else. And so she says, hey, call me up, because she wanted to hear my voice and verify who I was. She thought I was someone else. And so we were talking, and she says to me that Ted Gunderson talks on the phone every day to Michael Aquino.
Wow.
And I says, well, why would he do that? And she says, well, to make himself feel important, I suppose, And it's tucked it in the back of my mind. I said, okay, well, that's an explanation, I guess, because I like Ted, I think he's a good guy. So I accepted that as an explanation. And then later on, Stu Webb starts talking about all this stuff about how he was married to Anton LaVey's ex-wife or something like that, too.
That was true then.
Yeah, there's a lot of bizarre stuff. So then I became involved with Gunderson again. I was helping Art Bell with his lawsuit way back like 97. And I helped him negotiate a settlement with David Oates and Robert Stevens, this big $60 million defamation lawsuit that he had. And he was also suing Ted Gunderson at the same time in an unrelated defamation case, about the same kind of accusations, but unrelated. And so I says, oh, boy, I'm on a roll here. I did a great job with this negotiation. Let me call up Ted Gunderson and see if I can work out a deal with this. Right? I'm a hot negotiator. So I called up Gunderson, and he says, oh, yeah, I'm not concerned about that. And I'm not even handling it. My insurance company is handling that for me, my errors and omissions insurance. Right? So, because we're both private investigators, I'm familiar with errors and omissions. When you're a private investigator, you get errors and omissions insurance. If I produce a report for you and you wind up in a hot, you're getting sued for it, and I get sued for it, I'm covered if I make an error or I leave something out of my report. Now, at the time, he was telling me that his errors and omissions insurance was covering him in something he said on the radio. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I just assumed, okay. But now that I'm on the radio, I know my errors and omissions insurance does not cover anything I say on the radio. That's a totally separate. Even if every 5 minutes I'm talking about that I'm a PI on the radio, it's still not going to get me off the hook on that. But he told me it did. So then he came to me later on, and he told me his insurance company settled it. And because I talked to him again later on after that, and he said, "Oh yeah, I regret that I didn't fight it because they settled. My insurance company settled." So now, years later, and this always puzzled me again. I had a client not too long ago. This is like 6 months before Gunderson died. A client in California. We're talking about this. We're talking about that. And she says, "Oh yeah, I reported this to the FBI. I went down to the FBI headquarters." And she says, "And while I was there, I ran into Ted Gunderson." What? He says, "What would Ted Gunderson be doing at the FBI? He's been retired for years and years." And she goes, "Oh no, he was there." And I told him all about my problem. She says, and he was there, and he had a client with him, and he was working on something at the FBI. Now, one more thing was with Gunderson was, you can't forget too. Now Gunderson. And people say, oh, Ted Gunderson was poisoned, he was killed, and all the people who talk against him are COINTELPRO. They're all COINTELPRO agents who are trashing Ted Gunderson. Okay, but let's stop for a second. COINTELPRO was an FBI program that was run out of California at the time when Ted Gunderson was the head of the Los Angeles FBI.
Right, he was part of COINTELPRO.
Up to his neck.
Yeah, absolutely. With the Black Panthers, they were writing letters that probably got some people killed to try and break up the Black Panthers. They were writing letters that were basically supposedly from one Black Panther's wife to another Black Panther to try and cause a bunch of problems within the organization.
Exactly. So anyway, I have no ultimate conclusion, but that's my experience with Ted Gunderson.
I think he still was COINTELPRO. I think, and this gets back to where we were talking with the Process Church and a network of cults operating throughout the country. I think Gunderson was put there to muddy the waters. And in order to do that, you have to have truth, but at the last minute, you move the direction. And he got caught up with a lot of that satanic panic stuff with, Sean Sellers and Ricky Casso, the Acid King. And I was around during that time. I was part of the counterculture back then. And these guys, Sean Sellers and Ricky Casso that he was trying to put forward as these cultists couldn't even spell Satan correctly. I mean, these were guys who were just getting their information off of album covers and maybe had seen the Satanic Bible, but they were just self-styled idiots.
Before I forget, I got one more thing with Gunderson.
Yes, sir.
When Gunderson retired from the FBI, his first case that he took as a private investigator was the Jeffrey McDonald case.
Right.
Okay. The Jeffrey McDonald case took place at Fort Bragg. Who was stationed at Fort Bragg at the exact same time? Colonel Michael Aquino.
Right.
This murder took place on the base, and McDonald said, "Hey, this was a satanic cult. This was a witchcraft cult that handled this, right?" And there was this woman, the girl in the floppy hat, right? I forget her name right now, but this was the main witness, and Ted Gunderson got a hold of this witness, and he did a video affidavit with her, right? Video deposition. Now, interesting that the only witness, right, in this thing was controlled by Ted Gunderson.
Right.
He was the gatekeeper on that for a crime that could have led to Aquino. It was a witchcraft cult, and Aquino was on the base. How come Gunderson never mentioned Aquino and all that? There's a witchcraft cult, and here you got an openly Satanist guy wandering around the base.
Yeah, I think Ted Gunderson never really left the FBI, or that he was involved in some kind of black operation. There was some kind of psychological operation I feel he was involved with right up to the day he died.
Yeah, and you hear, too, about all these stories. He's selling Stinger missiles,
Right.
There's a lot of stories out there, man. I did a show with Doug Millar, who lived... Ted Gunderson flopping on people's couches all over the country. But Doug Millar, I did a show with him, and he has the funniest stories about Gunderson and Stu Webb and stuff like that. There's a really funny story about Stu Webb getting kicked out of Gunderson's apartment, and he climbs up and gets in through the terrace. He climbs up the outside of the house and gets in through the terrace. And you got to listen to the story. It's hysterical. And so there's a guy who's also living in the apartment on Ted's dime, And so the guy says, "How did Stu get in?" He goes to the front door to look outside to see how he got in. And Stu pushes him out the door, locks the door.
No kidding.
Oh, it's the greatest stuff, yeah. You can't, it's just such craziness.
So at the same time, you've got, I don't know if you're familiar with the murder of Margaret and Paul that happened in Toledo around 1980-ish.
No, I don't think I am. What's that?
Oh, man, really? This is wild stuff. There was, I believe it was April 5th. It was Holy Saturday, and inside of the Archdiocese, if I'm not mistaken, there was a ritual that happened. Well, everybody was there. One of the nuns was killed. She had a upside-down cross carved into her. She was sexually assaulted with objects from the church. A very, very brutal, horrific crime. And it ended up turning out, this is really wild, that it was the priest, the head priest, who had done this to her. He's now in prison for this. And it was a satanic ritual abuse. This is back in, I think, around 2003-ish, there was a woman who said she had been satanically ritually abused by the Roman Catholic Church. She accused the local priests in Toledo, Ohio, of performing rituals. They had placed her in a coffin with cockroaches. They forced her to eat human eyeballs. They committed human sacrifices in front of her, blood rituals. Her statements are all available and out there. And during this investigation, they reopened the case of the murder of this nun, who was Margaret Ann Paul. And it connected back with the head priest. His name was Gerald Robertson. And it was clearly a satanic ritual, and a lot of this stuff was covered up. And during this, the 80s, it was really odd that they were really seeming to push this, the Sean Sellers, the Ricky Casso Acid King, Say You Love Satan. These type of murders, when there really was an actual ritual murder that happened in Toledo, Ohio, that was no doubt connected to something big, and it never made the press. I mean, it did, but just locally, where you would think something like that would have been national news.
Well, it's interesting because I had on the show, too, Joe DeToma, who's from Yonkers, right around the same time as all that nonsense was going on down at Undermire Park. It was well known in that area that the churches were being broken into and that they were desecrating the sacrament and the Eucharist and stuff like that and the altars. And so him and his friends used to guard. He was just a bunch of street guys. He was a boxer, an amateur boxer. But he was Catholic, and they used to guard the churches so that these guys weren't breaking in and desecrating the churches.
Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced that wasn't all inside jobs. There was certainly a network, and it did connect into the Catholic Church in some way. This case, the Gerald Robinson case, look into it, man. It's really wild, and it's really wild that it just has not received the press that it should have. They carted this guy around. They knew what he was doing. They carted him around all over the place. They put him up in Jackson, Michigan. They put him all over he stole a car when he was in Jackson, Michigan, from the archdiocese. He stole one of their cars and about $8,000, and they never pressed charges against him. They just continued to move him place to place to place. And when they ended up arresting him, the police found boxes. He had pictures of dead bodies. He had all kinds of really odd things. And then when you connect that with all the people who had come forward with the satanic ritual abuse that actually opened this case, although they never proved that the satanic ritual abuse part had happened, houses were pointed out, names were named, and it did ultimately result in the arrest of Gerald Robinson. Yeah,
I definitely got to look into that and do a show about that. But, another thing that leads back to the archdiocese. By the way, too, now that you mentioned the archdiocese and the church, a couple of things I got for you. One thing is that the archdiocese of District of Columbia comes up in the D.C. Madam's phone records. Okay, all right, and I got those up in the members section. There's that. Another one is the Preppy murder case comes up in. He had all kinds of his mother. He had witnesses from the Archdiocese of New York coming to his trial as character witnesses. And what's interesting with him is that murder that took place with him, because he was a sort of bouncer at this bar in Manhattan. The family that owns that bar today has like 60% of all the liquor licenses in New York City, in Manhattan. Okay, they control it now. And there was, those kind of smiley face murders where people disappear from these bars and stuff like that, and they went up dead.
I sure do. They
had one in their bar, and no one in the bar cooperated with the police. Another archdiocese thing, and you're going to love this one, man. Back to Menser. Menser was involved in this other murder. That, by the way, involves like these bodybuilders and stuff like that, people who worked with Jack LaLanne and knew Jack LaLanne. It's just bizarro stuff, By the way, I'm going to have Jack LaLanne's son on the show one day.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
A lot of interesting stuff with that. He has information about these porno films that Ronald Reagan was involved in. But
wait a minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Ronald Reagan was in gay porn.
Really?
Yes. And Larry Flint had a copy of the video.
No.
And I know people that work for Flint. But back to the Archdiocese and Menser, this is a fascinating little tidbit in all of this. There was this rich guy in California, and he got involved with this 300-pound black transvestite manager of an escort service. And something happened between these two. Okay, they had some kind of relationship. At one time, they were in love with each other. Blackmail possibly involved, and they got into this whole thing of threatening phone calls back and forth and harassment and vandalism on cars and things, and went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And this woman, and we have her phone records, we have from the police reports, she would call him up 60 times in 1 hour. Then she would call the Vatican and talk to the Vatican for 20 minutes and go back to calling this guy back and forth for another hour. No explanation. And you'd think the cops would say, why is she calling the Vatican? No explanation why. And I ran it by I've told everybody who has ever been any kind of a connection to this case. I've asked them about that, and no one has an answer for me.
Well, it's funny. It's because, like you mentioned, the Finders and even the Son of Sam case, you know, going back that way, it always seems like these investigations get stopped. The Finders case was stopped under national security, which is just blows my mind after what they found there. The computers, the pictures of animal sacrifices, the naked children, and they actually had arrests, and they came in and shut it down because of national security. That alone is really scary. But then you look at the Son of Sam case, and I mean, the detectives, it's my understanding that, you know, most, or at least many of the detectives never ever thought that that was a single killer. Even the police sketches, one of those sketches is a woman. And when you look at the timeline, David Berkowitz couldn't have done at least one of those killings.
Well, the DA actually reopened the case, you know, to look into all this stuff with the cult.
Right, isn't it still open at this time?
Oh, I don't know about that. Hey, but you want to talk about back to the Finders for 1 second? You'll never believe, you know how the Finders were supposed to be going to a school in Mexico for smart kids? You know who went to that school? Whitley Strieber.
No.
Yeah, man. Whitley Strieber, who started the whole thing about alien abductions and stuff.
Get out of here. I didn't even know there really was a school.
Yeah, oh, no, yeah, there's a school. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's come up, too. Other people have mentioned it, too. I've had other people talk about child sex trafficking through Mexico, and that same school and stuff comes up.
Whitley Strieber, no kidding.
Yeah, a lot of weird stuff, man. You know, a lot of weird stuff.
It's all connected, and that's where it just almost gets daunting. Is that it's so hard to even stay on topic here because the connections just continue to go and go and go, and it's like after a while you start to realize that it seems anyway, almost everyone who's in the public eye in some way, shape, or form is part of something, and it's really daunting.
Yeah, it is, you know, and you know, I had on the other DC Madam guy, Henry Vincent, you know, and he was all involved in Franklin cover-up and stuff like that, and he had the male escort ring going on, and it's in the members section on OppermanReport.com, and if you talk to him, because first of all, you know, he had a gay escort service. And so they started wanting to get underage kids, and he wouldn't do it. And he met with Lawrence King, the guy, you know, who was part of the Franklin cover-up.
Absolutely.
And that guy Spence. And when Spence would come to his apartment and stuff like that, his bodyguard team were all Secret Service agents. You know?
Sure.
Right. And
that went right up to the White House.
Right.
That whole Franklin cover-up.
So they, what do you call it? They blackmailed him. You know, they got him on tape because Spence had this elaborate recording equipment in his apartment. But when I talked to Henry Vincent about this, and he's a very humble guy, you know, this guy went through hell. They put him in prison, you know, and then they tried to put him. They put him in prison twice. When he got out, they put him in again. And so we were talking about this, and he has a whole list of names of people in media and stuff like that all attended these parties where these little kids were being supplied to, like names you would recognize, you know, right off the top of your head.
Sure.
So the media is totally controlled and blackmailed by the same activities. Just like you got the Epstein case today with all these characters. Yeah. It's just at the highest levels.
You know, you look at Anderson Cooper, and he's a Vanderbilt. You know, there's an interesting guy right there. What was he doing? He was interning with the FBI, and then all of a sudden, just for no reason, decided, hey, I'm going to be a journalist.
When I was a kid on Staten Island, we used to go to I think it was Moravian Cemetery, and we would go there. You'd have to go down this long trail by this fence, and then you'd go through a hole in the fence, and then you'd get to Vanderbilt's tomb on Staten Island. And you could climb to the top of the tomb, and at the top, once you got to the top, it was very dangerous to get up there, too. It was very, you know, they would just, where everybody would have their parties up there, their cake parties. This was a spot where there was a lot of date rape went on up there. You'd get the girls up there and you get them, you know, unconscious on drugs and shit. And satanic graffiti and candles and stuff all at the top of this tomb. And I used to say, well, Vanderbilt, that's such a big, powerful name. Why can't this family protect this tomb from all this crazy stuff that's going on up here? And I think it's because they want that. You know? That's part of what they want, that chaos magic and that ritual magic and all those stuff going on up there, and rapes and things, and kids out of their mind on PCP up there and falling off, because there were cases where kids fell off there. You know, it was a nuisance, an attractive nuisance. How come nobody ever got sued? So that's something that always struck me as well.
Totally. A lot of these families, the old families, I mean, there is certainly an occult connection. A lot of you look at even like Jet Propulsion Laboratories, Jack Parsons. I mean, he was one of the top rocket scientists in the country, and he's hobnobbing with Aleister Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard, and they're doing rituals in the desert. And I mean, you know, MK Ultra. It's just, it's all about control. It's all about I think that they use a lot of this. I think there's a dark power. I truly do. I don't dispute that there is something supernatural and dark that's involved with all this. But the other level, I think a lot of this has to do with control. Like these young boys and these child prostitution rings can be used for blackmail to control politicians. And back when homosexuality was, you know, totally taboo, they could use that to control politicians. And then at worst case scenario, they own the media. They own the government agencies that can stop investigations, and they can have people killed.
Yeah, I would agree with you. You know, I think they do get some power from these rituals and these blood sacrifices. I think there's some kind of power they get from it. Especially when you get to the West Memphis 3 case. I just did a show yesterday. I recorded a show with this guy who had an experience with them, that bunch. And it's the supporters of these child killers, you know, who were doing ritual killing, in my opinion, are fanatical. Yeah, they're fanatical. These supporters, they're fanatical. And there's this thing where they lie. They all know they're lying. But they can also get other people to believe their lies, and they can get other people to lie for them. There's something with this lying business and this human sacrifice that's connected up, because I've seen it in other situations too. It's very bizarre.
Certainly. And, you know, you brought up West Memphis 3. Isn't it interesting, the people who have come out as a lot of these supporters? You had HBO, essentially. You had Johnny Depp. Didn't Damien Eccles or live with Johnny Depp?
Well, they all got matching tattoos, you know.
No.
Yeah, that guy and the guy who did The Hobbit too, I forget his name, who put up like, you know, $10 million for Damien's defense. You know, I believe that, I don't talk about this a lot, but it's out there, that Damien is telling these people that either he is a descendant of Crowley or that he's a reincarnation of Crowley. And if you look at him, he looks a lot like Crowley, especially when Crowley was young, if you look at him. And this whole bunch of his family and stuff like that, they all got this witchcraft connections. This girlfriend, Dominique Tier, you know, her cousin in California was T.J. Tier. She was a head of a vampire cult, where she was actually a spokesperson for vampirism out of Transylvania, you know?
Really?
Oh, yeah, man. Oh, yeah. There's a whole thing, too, in that case where they talk about Dominique Tier had just come back from a trip from California, and she brought books and stuff and magazines and things. One of the magazines she brought with her, because T.J. Tier ran a magazine, and in there was music to sacrifice children to. Music to use while you're sacrificing children. So, and then she brought us, and then she tried to, the reason why we know about all this is because they cleaned out the house. She threw it in the garbage in front of her house, and they got it out of the garbage. So, man, dude, so much going on there with that bunch, man. Forget it, you know. And then, you know, they're involved. You know, he's now in a movie with Genesis P. Orridge, you know, who was original Process Church, who was this this guy who was his turned his sexuality to an art project where he's now half man, half woman. It's this bizarre thing.
That seems to be part of it. Some androgynous. When you look at the Baphomet, it's androgynous, and there's something that has to do with androgyny with these. I don't necessarily want to call them Satanists or Luciferians, but occultists.
Yeah, there's something about the tattooing too, because P. Orridge was involved in the tattoo movement. You know, that really took off in this country as well. And not only does Damien and this guy from The Hobbit and Johnny Depp have the same these sigil tattoos, but they got these turtle tattoos, and there's this recent theory that the injuries on the little boys were caused by turtles living in the water, and now suddenly all these guys are running out getting these turtle tattoos. What's the significance of a turtle tattoo other than the connection to the murder of these little kids? And also too, when you get to Depp, he owned that Viper Room. There's a lot of murders around that Viper Room in California. There was a
right River Phoenix.
River Phoenix, yeah, and I think one of them too took a drink and said, "Oh my God, what's in this drink?" And I think River Phoenix was dating a Depp's ex-girlfriend or something. So that there's a whole bizarre connection to these characters. Their connections to Hunter S. Thompson, who has been alleged to be a photographer with the Franklin cover-up, with all that stuff with the Johnny Gosch. But, even if you overlook that, which could be iffy, Hunter S. Thompson, is hanging out with people like Don Johnson, was his best friend and neighbor who, was with Melanie Griffin when she was like 14 years old.
Right.
That's right in front of you, man. That's not, no one's denying that. And Melanie Griffith grew up, with lions.
No kidding.
Oh, her parents had pet lions. The whole Melanie, you got to look at the whole Melanie Griffith thing. But Don Johnson too has been accused of all kinds of stuff besides this. Even here in Las Vegas, all kinds of stuff at the Hard Rock Hotel, in women's bathrooms and stuff.
Oh, it's like Mark David Chapman. Wasn't he George Bush's neighbor?
No, I don't know about that. Mark David Chapman being George Bush's neighbor. But Mark David Chapman has a ton of stuff. First of all, this is, and it's been confirmed to me. I haven't. People sent me the information. I haven't looked it up, but that he did either give some bullets to Kenneth Anger, or some bullets were given to him by Kenneth Anger. Mark David Chapman also too was a security guard in Beirut. No one talks about that. Mark David Chapman has had a huge art collection on a security guard's salary in Hawaii.
Right.
He was known to the people, and I talked to Tony Ortega about this. He was known to the Church of Scientology there in Hawaii. And I met Mark David Chapman. I met him at Yippie headquarters, and there's no explanation for him being there. And I believe that there were 2 Mark David Chapmans in Manhattan that weekend of the murders, for a whole slew of reasons.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Yeah, because the guy who James Taylor met was the same one that I met, this agitated, freaked out guy. But then the one that was hanging out in front of the Dakota was this calm guy who was hanging out with these girls and taking them to dinner, and he's hanging out with Jose Padermo. Was everyone I've talked to about him. This guy was no slouch. This guy was a rough and tumble kind of guy. He was at the Bay of Pigs. And if the Mark David Chapman that I met, this wacky guy, would have been out in front of, I think the Padermo would have gotten rid of him and not allowed him to hang out there. It would have been run off. Like a lot of people were run off out in front of the Dakota in those days.
Yeah, that's just amazing, the connections.
Yeah, and I talked to May Pang, and I talked to a few people about, what's her name, Yoko. And, Yoko's a witch. Yoko does witchcraft. Yoko does.
She came from a very elite family as well, didn't she?
They were related to Hirohito.
Wow.
I know, man. And who did I just have on? I just had someone else on, and we were talking about Yoko. Oh boy, this is good stuff. Yeah, this guy Jeffrey Juliana, he's in the member section too. I got to put him on the air. He got. You can go to his website. If you look up Jeffrey Juliana, there's stuff for free on his website you could find. These recordings that he has of John and Yoko talking about their sex life. You've never heard this stuff anywhere else before. But he's another guy that's been kind of suppressed. And he knows everybody around the Beatles and Yoko and stuff like that. And what's his name? You talked about before about Laurel Canyon. Elliot Mintz. You got Elliot Mintz, who was this guy living in Laurel Canyon in an apartment. He was behind on his rent. And he gets word the night of the assassination and gets a bad feeling and hops on a plane and arrives in New York and has the phone number for the guardhouse at the Dakota. And somehow, and when he gets off the plane, he finds out that John Lennon's been killed. He's dead. Bizarre story about how he showed up in New York that night with this urgent feeling. And then hangs out with Yoko Ono for, like, I think the next 40 days, 50 days straight, or something like that, or 3 months straight every day, handling all the media and stuff on this. And now is one of the most richest, powerful people in Hollywood, coming from a guy who couldn't pay his rent in Laurel Canyon. And then you have one of his clients, one of his biggest clients, was Paris Hilton, you know.
Right.
You know, you look up Paris Hilton. If you Google Adnan Khashoggi, Paris Hilton, there's these. Adnan Khashoggi was the world's richest man at one point, you know, an arms dealer, friends with Donald Trump. And he sold his yacht to Donald Trump. They're both using. Guys partying on his Trump are people like Michael Jackson and Geraldo Rivera and Ann Coulter, are all partying on this guy who admits now that he was donating money to Osama bin Laden. Okay, his arms dealer fortune. You know, he has an island, a private island in the Bahamas with a private airstrip right in the middle of the big cocaine, empire. Okay, so let's overlook all of that. But if you Google him and Paris Hilton in the same, and you look up Google images, there's a party where this guy threw. And you can see the sequence of events where all these young girls like Paris Hilton and Chloe Sigourney, that girl.
Sure.
Yeah, and they're all showing up at this party, and they're all, you know, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in their beautiful outfits. And not even 15 minutes later, they are all out of it, man. They are all wasted, you know. They went straight to the heroin room and got shot up, and you know, and you can look at the pictures yourself and tell me what you see. And then that's a whole character. And it was, you know, Nikki Hilton just married one of the Rothschilds.
Yeah,
you know that? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Have you seen the pictures from the Rothschilds' parties that they had in the 1970s?
I saw that, and you know who used to go to those parties too at Evelyn Rothschild's mansion is Jeffrey Epstein and Alan Dershowitz. According to Dershowitz, that's where they met.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, these are rich people, and those were clearly satanic. I mean, she's wearing goat's head,
yeah,
pentacles, and these are some of the richest people in the world. And those pictures that came out of that party, and that's what was made public. Nobody can doubt that something really strange was going on there. Oh
yeah, Salvador Dali was I believe the created the theme for that. And yeah, you know, he comes up in the process in New York and Mapplethorpe and Patty Smythe and all that stuff, you know.
So do you think something was set down during the Crowley days that transpired and started really coming to age in what the hippies called like the age of Aquarius, that had been set down to happen, and that now we're experiencing the next phase?
Well, you know, I'm 53 years old, you know, and I've seen things change a lot from when the Beatles first came out, and then the whole LSD and the revolutionary 60s and 70s and stuff. And yeah, that theory of that it was all, a lot of it was, we know for a fact, the women's movement, you know, Gloria Steinem was all Rockefeller funded and CIA funded, CIA creation. She was CIA agent, Gloria Steinem. The women's movement, a lot of this gay rights stuff, you know. Hey, you know, but is there a master plan bringing it all in and publicizing it? I guess, yeah, there is, you know, in the media and stuff. I remember back in New York City, because you know, there used to be this commercial Colombian pot people used to buy and sell there. There's $3.50 a pound, this brown garbage. And then when they started bringing in this really good Sensimilia, this exotic marijuana, you couldn't sell it. You know, no one would pay that much for it because they hadn't tried it yet. They didn't know what it was like.
Right.
But then when 60 Minutes did a show about Hawaiian marijuana, and this marijuana that's grown in Hawaii, and look at it, it's seedless and it's so good, and it gets you high 10 times, and then you buy this little tiny package for $10. You know, this little tiny gram, and you'd pay for $10. Normally you'd pay for like 3.5, 8 grams, you know. And this new thing, the next day, everyone had to have Hawaiian. Now, no one knew about it before 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes did a commercial. For this more expensive, powerful marijuana that now they want to legalize and get everybody on. I'll tell you another thing,
that happened with crack as well.
Oh, that really happened with crack, yeah. But another thing, too, I found out is with this business about these psilocybin mushrooms, right? that grow in the Northeast, all over, Humboldt County, and you can just pick them up in Seattle, all over this place, right?
Sure.
That strain of mushrooms comes from a laboratory. It's not the same strain of psilocybin mushrooms that comes from Europe that grows underneath logs and underneath naturally. The stuff that grows here naturally that you can get anywhere, you just pick it, and even in wood chip beds, in front of people's houses and stuff. That comes from a laboratory, that strain of mushrooms. And I got that from a mushroom expert.
Oh, I absolutely believe that.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of this has been controlled, and I think it's just like the serial killers. Yeah. Isn't it interesting that we don't have them anymore? We have mass murderers now. You had back in the 70s and 80s, you had the Hillside Stranglers, you had Ted Bundy. You had this push to create fear about serial killers, and now we have kicked that up a notch, because a serial killer I can protect myself from. I can lock my doors, I can get a big dog, I can have a firearm, I can be alert. But a mass murderer, I cannot protect myself from. That's an ambush that could happen anywhere. That is the difference between being in combat in a war zone and being able to pull back and have a break, or being constantly in a war zone. We are constantly in a war zone now with these mass murderers.
Yeah, and it happens at the school where your kids are at school and you're at work, so you're not there to protect them. And there's a lot of bizarre stuff came up, when those first Columbine and stuff like that. And I've even found out, too, that even some of the people who promote the Columbine truth movement or whatever, a lot of these guys, you can't be trusted. They're all disinfo and
Have you read some of the actual facts of the Columbine case? Because they're mind-blowing. And I read a book that was actually, it was supposed to be the most comprehensive work about Columbine, and it didn't take a conspiratorial view at all. However, it laid facts out, and many of the facts that it laid out were just absolutely absurd. They claimed that Klebold and Harris walked into the cafeteria carrying propane tanks, and nobody noticed them. And they sat the propane tanks down. They left, went out, and brought more propane tanks back into the school. Also, the cameras just happened to have been turned off during this entire time.
Oh, yeah. The amount of weight of the bombs and guns and stuff that was brought in is some crazy amount that no way these two guys could have done it by themselves. And there's so much, too, because this whole thing about the trenchcoat mafia was that they were being bullied. These guys were the bullies, and that the trenchcoat mafia, this group of the trenchcoat mafia, when they would grow up and graduate, they would go on to work as maintenance workers at the school, and they would go on to work as local police officers. So, this is a really elaborate group.
Sure.
But, I got to tell you, though, man, like a lot of the information that comes out from it, like I'll give you an example. One of the guys who was one of the original Columbine researchers and investigators who had the website, the big one, was Justin Tribble. And today he's a professional hoaxer. Something happened with him where during he was investigating Columbine and writing about it all the time, he got arrested and then suddenly stopped, being a Columbine guy. And now he does these hoaxes because I caught him. I caught him doing a hoax. He did the Dr. Bill Weld hoax. Where he was claiming he was part of this NSA thing, and he was on radio shows, and I caught him, and I contacted him, and I said, "Hey, I'm the guy that I know this is you, and I'm the guy that caught you. The other guy emailing you is me too. The guy you just confessed to is also me." And he says, "Oh, I get it now. Well, what do you want me to do?" So within seconds of me busting this guy, he's rolling over and I'm willing to do whatever I want him to, So whatever happened with this arrest, it's suddenly, this website comes down and now he's a professional hoaxer. He does the Joel Osteen hoax,
Right.
The guy's a professional hoaxer now. It's just, there's a lot of disinfo out there, man. And
sure.
And not all of it too is paid off guys, COINTELPRO types. But there's a lot of it's just confusion and sloppiness and ego and just people just repeating the same nonsense over and over again. It's just out of, I don't know, some kind of mass hysteria.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it muddies the water. Truth is so elusive right now.
Yeah.
The only thing you can hope for is to be able to pick out the lies, because I've given up on ever finding the truth of things, because it seems like every time I think I'm getting close, something else happens to throw that off, or I find out that something I've heard isn't true. And it's just the amount of the internet, as for as much of a blessing as it has also been a curse, because we are inundated with information overload, and so much can be inserted into fact that can end up coming back to bite you in the ass and make you look like an idiot because you latch onto these things. And I might be talking, 90% of what I'm saying might be true. I may believe 100% of it, but that last 10% was carefully put in there to discredit me at some point, or anyone for that matter.
Yeah, so true. It's so true. Just like even if you are like in politics or something like that, they'll let you go along, but then they got some kind of dirt on you that they can pull out later on to discredit you if they have to.
Oh, what do you think about Sonny Bono?
Ooh.
Do you think he was murdered?
Well, you know what? I haven't looked into that whole part of it, but it's just the whole thing with Sonny and Cher and him, because he was a real thug in the music business, with Phil Spector and
Yeah, he was Suge Knight of his day.
Yeah, right. This little Sonny and Cher. Yeah, and then this whole thing when then he becomes elected to Congress, and then his wife is part of, I think it was the 9/11 Commission. No, she was part of something, and then she makes a statement. It was the impeachment things of Bill Clinton. She's part of the impeachment hearing, and she says, puts in the record. I just want to put in the record that my husband Sonny was addicted to drugs at the time he died. It's the most bizarre thing in the world. And I remember watching this live, and my mouth just kind of drops open, and I said, "What just happened there?" And then they just go on, impeaching Clinton. I'm working on all this stuff right now too with Ken Starr. The Ken Starr, I'm convinced, man, was running both sides of the track on this.
Yeah, they were covering up a lot of stuff. I think the whole Monica Lewinsky thing was something that was set off to divert our attention from other things that were happening. I think that it was pro wrestling. I think Ken Starr was right in bed with Bill Clinton.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I've been doing a series on Vince Foster, and I'm doing a show later on today about Vince Foster again with this guy Patrick Knowlton, who was a witness. But even when I just recently I interviewed Gary Byrne, who was the Secret Service agent, just came out with this best-selling book about the Clintons, Crisis of Character, I think it's called. And so when I had him on the show, I started asking him, hey, you were there for Vince Foster. What happened with this? And he said, oh, yeah, I testified for Ken Starr. And let me tell you something. Something was going on because you'd talk to the lawyer, and then the next day all the lawyers knew about it. So they were all talking to each other. They were hanging out at some bar after the hearings and after the testimony, all trading notes. So now here's a guy, he doesn't have an axe to grind. He wasn't even expecting that question. He didn't come on my show to talk about that. But, you can kind of – my point is, like, what I'm trying to do now is interview all these people and just get them on record.
Sure.
And we could pick out little pieces here and there of what they're doing, see how it fits in this other puzzle here and this other stuff, and just get them all on record, get them all on tape as much as we can, get them talking as long as you can. We'll see what comes out. And so you're right. There's a lot of disinfo out there. There's a lot of nonsense and confusion. But let's get them all on record. You don't have to agree with everybody, but just get them down, and we can compare it all later on and come up with some stuff. Like I had Hank Harrison on the show. And right toward the end of the show, Hank Harrison is the father of Courtney Love, but he was involved with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and David Geffen, and the Grateful Dead. And
he was their manager, wasn't he?
He was he kind of backs away from that now, and he says he was like a road helper, kind of guy. Ken Casey was involved in it, but the guy was in the mix with a lot of stuff. And at the end of the show, I said, hey, man, what do you know about Courtney Love being involved in black magic, witchcraft, anything like that? By the way, he dated one of the Manson girls, too, Sandra Good. He dated her sister. He's going to send me the pictures of that.
Wow.
Yeah, no, we just spent like 4 hours with him in California. I videotaped with him for like 4 hours.
Wow.
A lot of interesting stuff, okay? We got to edit all that down. I got no time. But he says to me at the end of the show, he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, I can tell you that at MTV, when MTV first got started, that they would do occult rituals and parties and for entertainment and stuff like that. They were having all this stuff going on. And he didn't come right out and say human sacrifice or animal sacrifice, but that's the impression I got. And I said, hold on. How do you know this? Who told you this? He goes, well, have you ever heard of Ken Anger? And I said, yeah, I know Kenneth Anger. He goes, well, yeah, I was friends with Kenneth Anger, and Kenneth Anger told me this. So, it's a new revelation that's out there, I don't think you can deny it. If you look at Adult Swim, this Cartoon Network in the middle of the night, the kind of stuff they got on there, right in your face, left and right, and Ken Anger is involved with them.
Sure. Super Bowl halftime. I mean, this is all. It has moved mainstream. When I look at the stuff that we listened to, and I was a headbanger back in the, late 80s, and the stuff that we had on our record albums, our videos were nothing compared to what pop music is today. It's like this whole occultic idea has went full mainstream. Yeah, it's so true. When you see like this kid, Hannah Montana, that girl, whatever her name is. Oh, right. Oh, geez, I can't think of her name. Miley Cyrus. Yeah, look at her. What can you? Obviously, acting out sexually in such a bizarre way. All the Disney, all those Disney people, Britney Spears, they were all it was an offshoot of MK Ultra. I think they did close down MK Ultra, but I think the mind control experiments continued. Well, very interesting. Britney Spears, when she was going through that public breakdown, her manager and / boyfriend and live-in, guy was Sam Lufty, and then more recently, Sam Lufty, where does he turn up? He was Courtney Love's manager. And just recently, I believe, got arrested. He has to do with some kind of a kidnapping of Frances Bean's ex-husband, No kidding. So that connects with Kurt Cobain. Yeah. There's a lot of something's going on with that whole Cobain thing too. We just did another interview about that last week, and Courtney. Forget it. There's so much with that. There's Courtney. By the way, Courtney Love too. By the way, she went to the Presidio Middle School, where Aquino. I did not know that. No one knows it. This is little tidbits you get from here and there, and you put it all together. Yeah, there are definitely, and then that's the thing when you get started talking about this, the amount of connections, it's so hard to stay on one topic. I started when I was a really big O.J. Simpson guy when the trial was going on. It was O.J. So was I. Yeah. So was I. I was obsessed with it, and I stumbled on this thing, and it started off the limo driver, Alan Park. He was being interviewed one day by Greta Van Susteren, who, by the way, is a Scientologist. The Church of Scientology is all over that case. I just even found out recently that OJ was a Scientologist for a while. Absolutely. Church of Scientology is all over that case. Okay, almost everybody involved in that case is involved in Scientology. But Alan Park says, "Oh yeah, my mother is one of the attorneys for the Manson family." And I said, "Whoa, that's a really interesting little tidbit." Then I start hearing about how OJ and Al Cowlings and their drug dealing was involved with Marty, the guy who was the co-hit man with Menser, and just one connection after another to the Charles Manson murders, to the Process Church, and to the Church of Scientology, which is really like the covering thing for the whole OJ case and drug dealing. And I just sat there. This was way before the internet was big, and I had made a flow chart on a piece of paper of how everybody was either connected to the Church of Scientology in that case, or to Manson, or to Process Church, and it was so overwhelming and so frightening that I actually tore it up. I would have to go back now and recreate. A lot of it's still in my head, but dude, there's so many connections to all this. To these big historic events. And if you look at it, if you go back to Manson, what was the theory with the Manson murders? They wanted helter-skelter. They wanted a war between the blacks and the whites. Which is coming down now. And what did O.J. cause? A war between the races, blacks and whites. What did Son of Sam want? They wanted chaos. They wanted confusion. They wanted, chaos in New York, right? And Absolutely.
by the way, too, you know what I found out recently, too? Because I'm in touch with a couple of guys that were victims of the that Son of Sam cult, which, by the way, too, the Son of Sam cult was also a child molesting cult, too. They were molesting kids.
Sure.
Now, one of their victims tells me, oh, boy, he sent me some stuff. I got to tell you off the air. But he tells me, you remember in New York City? Oh, you're from New York?
No, sir. I'm from Michigan.
Remember in New York City, there was this thing where Dart Man, where this guy was hitting girls in the butt with darts in New York City. And no one could figure out who this guy was and how he was delivering these darts. He had some kind of a device that was just enough pressure to get through their pants and shoot them in the butt with these little darts.
I do remember that.
I
absolutely do.
That guy was Process Church. He was part of that cult.
Get out of here.
Just to create chaos and confusion. Again, with another one, the Atlanta child murders. Again, it's that racial overtone and create the chaos, can create the confusion, and the racism to create the race war. It seems to be the same pattern going on for a long time. And even who's the other guy? Jeffrey Dahmer. Most of his victims were black, and he had an altar. He had a satanic altar in his apartment. And there's pictures of it.
Sure.
They never talk about it. And his father even said, you know what? I've had thoughts of doing the same things. Okay, in his book, he says, I had weird fantasies about doing the same things my son did, which is a whole other weird thing. But the story about how when Dahmer was on a school trip to Washington, D.C., he picked up the phone and he contacted the White House. And he arranged a special tour of the White House for his
private tour.
Yeah.
Private tour, yes. Absolutely. It's amazing. How could that happen?
Well, also, too, I just interviewed a guy about Dahmer, and this guy was a witness. He saw Dahmer at the mall where Adam Walsh disappeared from. And he's convinced that Dahmer was involved, was the murderer of Adam Walsh. Okay? There's a lot of stuff goes on here. But the thing is, there's no doubt. Okay, Dahmer was working at a pizzeria, Mr. Pizza it's called, down there in Florida. As he was living out by the dumpsters, then they let him live in the meter room, right? And they found a dead body out by the dumpster. And Dahmer was the witness who found the body and reported it to the police. And he's in the police report is discovering this body. Just a coincidence? You know what I mean?
Really?
Yeah. And so in that meter room where he was living, they broke into the meter room and they did the luminol test, and there was blood all over the place.
No kidding.
Yeah, man, there's all kinds of stuff.
That's like who was that other, the clown serial killer?
Gacy.
Gacy, yes, he was connected.
Yeah,
very politically connected.
Yeah, and there's even one of the mothers just coming out too recently saying there's no way he killed my son alone. And that a lot of people think he was just they were using his house as a dumping ground for those bodies. We got to do a show about that too.
Yeah, I actually think that is the case. I think a lot of these serial killers were essentially, I guess, I don't want to use the word patsies because I think they were guilty. I think they were involved in the killings, but I don't think hardly any of them acted alone.
Ariel Castro. Okay, Ariel Castro with the Cleveland, with the three girls, Amanda burying them, right? There is so much to that case, man. First of all, two of those victims knew his daughter, were friends with his daughter. His daughter was running away from home and running to his house when those girls were there in prison in his house. Okay, all right? And his daughter went to prison for killing her own daughter. Ariel Castro's daughter is in prison for killing her own daughter. Look it up. Ariel Castro accused his ex-wife's new common-law husband of molesting his daughter. They arrested him. And he's there to the police saying, hey, man, what are you arresting me for? Ariel Castro knows all these missing girls. How come you're not investigating him? He's telling the daughter to lie about me. He gets convicted, this guy.
Wow.
Yeah, oh yeah, man, there's so much with that case. There's so much. And then they bulldoze down the house. Get this. Then when they go in there and they raid the house, right? And if you read his, if you listen to his sentencing speech, right, when he's giving wants mercy from the court, he goes, Your Honor, They say that they found $20,000 in my washing machine, and and they're going to seize the $20,000. And that's fine. You could take the money, but there was a lot more than that. Where did this guy get all this cash? In a washing machine in his house, hidden in there. Well, he's a bus driver. He's not working for a couple of years. Oh my God, there's so much with that case. It's just unbelievable. And I can't get anybody to come on here and talk about it. This is another problem. See, a lot of times, I can't do a show because I don't have a guest to talk to come on here. You can hear me say it, but I don't even remember half of it. But that case is this. And you know what? Too, when all these cases do, they always make a movie of the official version. Jeffrey McDonald, they make a movie of the official version. With Ariel Castro, they make these books and movies of the official version. McMartin Preschool. You know who's behind that McMartin Preschool movie with James Woods?
I'm afraid to ask.
Oliver Stone.
Wow. That's not surprising one bit. He was behind that Kennedy movie.
Right. But Oliver Stone, but also, too, the screenwriters who were part of that were part of the False Memory Syndrome, who organized the whole 60 Minutes thing with the McMartin family. The thing was a total whitewash by these people. By the way, too, that these people were involved in child pornography. The people who wrote that.
Yeah, the people who started that foundation.
Right.
Their daughter accused them of essentially the same stuff.
Yeah. It's right in your face.
Dark past.
Yeah.
Really dark past.
Yes, I called Sean Stone on it. I says, man, what your dad made this movie. It was a whitewash. And he was warned about it. I know the father was warned about it. Oliver Stone. He was given all this information when he was producing the movie. So.
See, I think that when you go back to the Process Church, and they seem to have their 4 sections. They had the, the Christs, the Jehovah's, the Satanists, and the Lucifers. And they felt that each of these different sections were of equal necessity. I don't know if you've downloaded some of their works. There's a torrent out there that's got a lot of the original Process Church information.
Yeah, I've been sent that stuff, and people that are come out of there are fans of the show, and they tell me that they like me because they think I'm a good man, they think I'm a good guy, they think I'm a good father to my kid, and it's basically the stuff I say is true.
You're legit.
Yeah,
you are. You're
yeah.
a legit guy. I was telling my wife that, last night, is that, you get a lot of radio hosts and they have a persona that it's not them. It's a persona. It's an act. It's entertainment. You can tell that you are genuine. You are a legit guy. And I think that shows through in your shows.
Oh, yeah. I'm a jerk off the air just like I'm a jerk out of the air. A lot of these guys are nice on the air. They're a jerk off the air. I'm a jerk both times.
Hey, if the shoe fits.
Yeah. I don't know what to tell you. Thank you very much, I guess. But, I got an urgency to get this information out there and get stuff on the record, while we can.
I think it's important because I think society is becoming dumber and dumber by design.
Yeah.
And I think they're going for exactly what the Process Church had always aimed for, which is this mass chaos, this order out of chaos. Create the chaos and then control.
Yeah, well, but then you got to wonder because they do seem to be pretty well in control now. Like, what else do they really want? Unless they just want this complete pornographic type submission from us, which seems to be going on now too. Like, this woman in this car gets shot by the cops the other day, and yes, sir. Is that what they're looking for? Like this kind of pornographic, obscene submission to them. I read this thing last night from Eric Garner, who was killed in Staten Island where I grew up. And, he talks about how he filed a civil rights lawsuit 7 years before they choked him out on Staten Island, where he was anally raped, man. They did a cavity search in public, in the street, pulling his pants down, and you could find it online, the civil rights handwritten complaint that he did. So is this what they want from us? They want such perverse obedience and submission to them? There's this perversion to what they're doing as well. Because I've even heard that the stuff that went on down at Abu Ghraib, where our soldiers were torturing these people, and that we were raping their kids in front of them down there.
Yes.
Right, you heard that too? Okay, and
I have.
I've heard that these videos were sent that night to the White House, and people in the White House were watching those videos. When you hear these things over and over again from different sources, who when you're talking to somebody about something, and they're not on the show to come to you with that information, and then you bring it up to them, and they're aware of it, then you know it's real. Like with the situation I had on the Strange family, okay? Charles Strange, who was the father of one of the Navy SEALs. You know how all those 30 Navy SEALs died in that helicopter crash?
Yep, I sure do.
And they were connected to the Bin Laden raid?
Yeah, the supposed Bin Laden raid. I don't actually believe he was. I think he was already dead.
Well, listen, they think he's still alive, and he's in. And they made a joke that he's in Chicago selling hot dogs on the corner. Okay, and you want to know what? Even his son, who supposedly died in that plane, the helicopter crash. There's other evidence that sent text messages after he was dead, but they think that it's the government that did it. They have a real legitimate lawsuit against the government, where they can prove that the government's been spying on their computers and harassing them and hacking into their stuff. And it's a legitimate lawsuit. I've seen the stuff. I've seen the evidence. But to get back to this weirdness, there is something, and it's available on the internet, and it's called a ramp ceremony, where they brought in the coffins of all these Navy SEALs that were supposedly died in that helicopter crash. And they brought in an imam from Afghanistan, and he does a thing he curses their bodies to hell. He curses their souls to hell. This is on video. It's a smuggled video, but it's all real. It's been interpreted.
Right.
What is going on with that? How does that make any sense? What's the perversion behind that?
I can give you my opinion, and I really feel that this is, and not to get religious at all, but I feel they are ushering the way for the Antichrist.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think they're paving a path, and I think that you can see it all coming together now. And I think that this started a very, very long time ago, and I think we're seeing the fruits of their labor with society, with the craziness. You see these videos, and it's just shocking, and it really bothers me, of somebody being attacked on the streets.
Yeah.
And everyone, instead of helping, gets their cameras out to film. And I think, my God, is this where we've become as human beings?
Yeah, well, if you notice, too, it's a new development. This guy who got shot in the car the other day, that was broadcast live on FaceTime as it was going on.
Yes.
That's a brand new development. That's the first time we've had one of these snuff films, shown. And snuff film is behind a lot of this, too, because the whole theory was that Roy Radin, the reason why he was involved with this Son of Sam murders was these were snuff films that were being sold. Which I believe, because there's a whole story, a backstory about that, about how they went to get, to gather up copies of this film from people's homes and stuff like that.
Right, I heard that's why he was killed. They were looking for the snuff films.
I don't know about that. I believe, again, and now you got Robert Evans, and Laney Jacobs. I did a bunch of shows about that. Now, Robert Evans, man, was best friends with who? Robert Evans was cleaning up the blood over there at Polanski's house, because he was best friends with Polanski where these murders took place. People forget that. And now he's murdering Roy Radin. Now he's allegedly involved in the murders of Roy Radin. Where he was living with this girlfriend. And Mensa was also sleeping with Laney Jacobs, too. They were both sleeping with this chick, living with her and sleeping with her. There's phone calls the night of the murder back and forth from Laney Jacobs to Robert Evans. There's no way this guy would, hey, what are you talking about? What are you doing? Where are you going? What are they talking about that night? All these phone calls. He's taking the Fifth Amendment, pleading the Fifth on the witness stand. Nothing to see here. Go away. Nothing happened. And again, you got the whitewash books come out. And I talked to the guy and I says, well, do you think maybe you were, Robert Evans, very seductive guy, right? Very charming guy, right? You go into this palatial mansion, pictures on the wall of Teddy Kennedy, all this kind of stuff. And he's friends with the Jack Nicholson and Marlon Brando and all this. Do you think you were seduced by him? Silence.
Yeah.
Silence,
yeah.
So, you got to go back and listen to this stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there. Even more than I can even put together at this point. I need help. So.
No, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. And at the same point, it's very interesting.
It's interesting, It's interesting, and it is terrifying too, because they do seem to skate, and even when they go to prison, they keep their mouth shut. Something else there too, or they get killed in prison. Errol Castro dies in prison. Jeffrey Dahmer dies in prison.
Right? David Berkowitz, he was attacked. He didn't. He survived, but that very well could have been a warning.
Yeah, and
the one. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Very interesting too. Who was it? Jimmy Breslin? Jimmy Breslin had the crap beat out of him, in a bar.
Oh, the reporter?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And the scene in Goodfellas where they show that guy with the shine box and all that stuff like that, and the guy getting beat up. That's the bar where he got the crap beat out of him, Jimmy Breslin. And there's even a theory that even that scene in the movie is a signal to, is a warning to Breslin when it came out in the movie, that they used that same bar. But Breslin got the crap beat out of him.
Oh, I believe it. You look at the one, and you think why these guys don't talk.
Yeah.
The one time someone talked was Henry Lee Lucas, and that's an interesting fella right there. He had committed all these murders. He talked about this network, this cult that they were training, that they were assassins being trained in the Everglades, and that they were using them to commit murders. But at some point, the murders were what's the word I'm looking for here? The murders were appointed, and at other times they weren't, in order to cause confusion. And he came out, and I mean, they totally made him look like he was a liar. He had no credibility. And interestingly enough, he was the one person pardoned by Governor George Bush. They were executing people who, on death row, who had converted to Christ, who had, really legitimately probably felt sorry for their crimes. And then you had Henry Lee Lucas, who obviously didn't feel sorry for his crimes. And he was the one person during the tenure of George Bush that he pardoned him off of death row.
Yeah.
Really odd.
And he even talks about, this is before we knew about Matamoros, Mexico, and what went on over there. And he was talking about it before.
Yes.
Before.
Yes, he was talking about the drug dealing that was going on across the border there, and the people were killing other people in order to get some occult power so they could continue to not be caught in their dealings.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other thing. And to Matamoros in Mexico, too, like some really big, there was this big famous psychic that was on TV all the time. He was connected to that. He had connections to that place. It's just unbelievable, and it just stops. Like even with the connections of Jack LaLanne, and these bodybuilders, there were these bodybuilders, were used in all these murders. Man, the one with the black transvestite and the ones with the Roy Raiden, they were all around this. And Larry Flint with his blackmail operation. It's very widespread, widespread. And,
sure.
Yeah, you kind of think it's gone away and it's not so much in your face, but then there's a lot still going on.
Oh, absolutely. And you look at I don't know if you've watched the interviews between Ted Gunderson and Paul Benacchi. He did about, I'd say it was maybe a 5-hour interview. But in these interviews, Paul Benacchi, and this is prior to Bohemian Grove being a well-known thing, when Alex Jones supposedly, and which is another guy that I don't trust one bit. But Paul Benacchi talked about Bohemian Grove being, human sacrifice going on there. He was forced to kill another child while it was filmed. And he talked about the Bohemian Grove not by name but by location before it was a known entity. And interestingly enough there, and I believe I could be wrong here, but I believe he got a payout from the government and now just shuts up.
Well, I think he actually was convicted of perjury, Benacchi. But the other one just got busted again, one of the photographers. I forget his name right now. But he just went back to prison for possession of child pornography. I'm not going to remember his name, but one of the famous names in that. Hey, by the way, too, we can get into all of this too, man. Is then you got the camp was part of Operation Phoenix, the Phoenix program, and supposedly so was Mensa. So what's going on with that?
You know who else connects to Operation Phoenix? The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. His uncle was part of Project Phoenix, and supposedly, even in the official story, showed him pictures of them raping Vietnamese women and then shooting them in the head while they were being raped. Because the Phoenix program, for those who aren't aware, was essentially a terror program that the United States government was bringing on villages in Vietnam to make sure that they weren't helping the enemy. So they would go in there and commit these just horrific murders. And a lot of the serial killers that came out prior to after 1974 were somehow connected to that program. And then also Michael Aquino, he was connected to Phoenix.
Yeah, you got to check out. I did an interview with Doug Valentine, who did the Phoenix program book. And he had access to the CIA directors. He was in the CIA director's house. He had access to all this stuff. And we became buddies for a little while after that. And he was sending me all kind of information all the time. But the Phoenix program, if you listen to that interview, it's amazing how much of that was a racketeering operation, extortion being run by the CIA, extorting businessmen out of their businesses and their families and their wives and stuff. Really fascinating interview I did with him.
Really?
Oh, yeah, you got to look into that.
Oh, I'm going to have to read that book and listen to that interview.
Doug Valentine, yeah.
Absolutely.
And he can't do interviews. He doesn't do a lot of interviews now because he's deaf, so you have to do it on Skype with him, and he can read your lips while you do it. You can't really do a live interview with him. But he's doing another book, has another book coming out, too, so he'll be on the show again shortly. But it's all, it goes back to the military over and over again. Back to the Manson family. Tex Watson was like some kind of an Army Ranger who, by the way, too, that's a whole thing with him because he's the only one that they had to extradite him from this small town. He went back to Texas or something. And, it was definitely no hippie. That's for sure.
Oh, no. Yeah. None of them were. The leaders weren't. Manson wasn't a hippie either. Yeah. He even pretty much despised the hippies. He said he was a beatnik. And I think that was a lot had to do with discrediting the hippie movement. I think the anti-war movement was flooded with drugs and was eventually tarred as being violent thanks to the Manson killings.
I also did some interviews about the motorcycle gangs. If you look up those interviews, a lot of them are in the members section. And one period of time, I was going along great with this guy for years. And I mentioned Manson and Satan's Disciples, and I think it was Satan's Disciples or Satan Motorcycle Gang, whatever it was called. And then when I started mentioning Process Church, it was like, whoa, I know nothing. Goodbye. And I haven't heard from this guy again. I don't even think we're friends on Facebook anymore. So there was, this stuff is known. Like, a lot of people, when you start asking about it, if you listen to the second half of my interview with May Pang, and we became friends too. Me and her became friends. But the second half of the interview, there was a lot of, gee whiz, I don't know nothing. Everybody's afraid of Yoko, and afraid to talk about. One of the people who worked for her got arrested because he was trying to write a book. So a lot of people who know this stuff, while they'll just shut up and clam up on you. There's that too,
Absolutely. Ed, do you mind if we take a break real quick?
You know what? I don't mind. I think we should end it because I got
it.
I got to do a show like tonight live at 5:00. But thank you so much, man. Great stuff.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry. Thank you for coming on. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Me too.
If you could let us know where we could find you at.
Oh yeah. Well, Opperman Report. The radio show is OppermanReport.com. And if you just Google Opperman Report, we're on iHeartRadio, we're on iTunes, on Spreaker, YouTube. You can find it there. We're on American Freedom Radio, People's Internet Radio, Deprogrammed Radio, IPM Nation, a whole bunch of stations. Late Night in the Midlands plays us on Saturday nights. We're on Saturday and Sunday night at 7 p.m. on CBS Radio, Para X Radio. So you can find the show. It's out there. And also, too, Awake Radio, awakeradio.us. is an old station I just kind of took over, helping out and running. And we're going to have a lot of people on there coming on shortly. We're going to have Pierce Redmond joining the station, and Chuck Ocelli and Chris Milligan. So there's going to be a lot of new content on there that I think people are going to surprise what we have going on there.
That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Well, I really appreciate this, sir. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, man.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Ed.
Bye.